Welcome back to the Appraised podcast, Navigating Performance Management, your compass to HR success. I'm Roly Walter, founder of Appraised, and in this episode, we have the pleasure of speaking with Francesca Asante, Training Delivery Officer at ACAS. Francesca has a background in leadership, customer service, and hospitality, having worked in various organizations and sectors across the UK. Throughout her career, she has learned firsthand about the best workplace practices and how to build an engaged, motivated workforce. Now, at ACAS, she delivers training and provides practical advice on employment law and workplace solutions, supporting employees and employers in creating better working environments. Francesca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Good. Well, I think if our last chat is anything to go by, this is going to be really interesting and really informative for our listeners. So I'd love to get stuck in. And I think I'm going to ask you also in a minute just to tell us a bit more about ACAS. But, you know, I think most people will know that ACAS is a really important body in our industry and is sometimes seen as a body that's really there to kind of support workplace disputes. But there's actually a range of services that ACAS provides, right, to support employers and employees. So for anyone who isn't so familiar with ACAS, could you just give us a little bit of background on the organization, what you do, how it's seen, and the types of services that you provide?
Yeah, of course. I think there's so many different things available for everyone. And the key thing to get across straight away is that we're not just there for the employer, we're not just there for the employee, we are there for everyone. And we do that through different ways. And our kind of duty and remit is to prevent and resolve workplace problems. So that two-fringed approach. So the preventative side, that's where I sit in our training side, along with our helpline and a couple of the other departments running, and our business advisors as well. And yeah, we offer that kind of helpful information for how to resolve things informally or what next steps might be. And then we have the other side of the business where something has gone wrong and that informal advice hasn't worked, we then got the next step. So this is where our conciliators come in. And also, if someone did ever want to go to an employment tribunal, they have to contact ACAS first. And we really try to stop it from getting to that point. So offering mediation and conciliation, helping people to meet a common ground to prevent things from getting to that place. And it's typically very effective. The most recent statistic that I saw was something around kind of 10 out of 11 that we stop from going to an employment tribunal. So that's a lot of money back into the taxpayers' hands. And also really helping people to kind of get back on track.
Yeah, and disputes resolved. And yeah, that's fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
And you personally design and deliver training courses, right, for new and developing managers?
Yeah, I definitely do our managing courses. There's a couple of other ones that I'm involved with as well. So our training department offer a range of different products. We do something called open access events where anybody, just like you or me, could sign up to these events, come along, and there'll be up to 12 people also on there with you from a range of different industries. So you get to kind of get that experience from an ACAS trainer, but you also get the helpful discussion throughout the session as to what other workplaces do and how they use the best practice and what they've done that has helped them throughout the years. But then we also offer kind of bespoke workplace training as well. So if a workplace is bringing in a new policy on bullying and harassment, for example, or all the recent changes on the sexual harassment legislation that came into effect last year, we've done a number of tailored products for organisations where we go in and we look at what is it that they experience, where are their kind of stopping points, what is it that they need help with, and then give them bespoke training off the back of that.
Excellent. Okay, so you're effectively single-handedly trying to solve the accidental manager situation that I've spoken about.
A big part of it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, when we last spoke, you mentioned that how within your own career, you've seen both sides. You've obviously you worked for ACAS, but before that, you've also worked in other organizations. You might have seen witnessed the employer who may need support with a grievance or performance management process, but also the employee who's been laid off and needed support from ACAS on how to address this. So Could you tell me a little bit, or tell us a bit more about your background before you joined ACAS? Because I think it's really interesting to see the kind of journey that you've taken. It really, I think, explains a lot about why you do what you do.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, my career started fairly young. I was 19, fresh out of school, at university, and kind of working part-time in the hospitality industry. And that's where I kind of made my way into middle management through that. And a large part of that for me at the time was I was also studying leadership and development skills. So I was able to use those skills that I'd developed there and put them into practice in that role. But I then kind of fell into the role of training. I went onto a course myself and fell into becoming a trainer. And through that, I was working with people that were unemployed, trying to help them get back into the workforce. Sometimes long-term unemployed, sometimes short. It was a real mix. But in the 3 years that I was in that career, I was really able to see where people had been let down, where management had led to someone walking out of their job, where people had lost trust in the processes, the people who didn't want to disclose their disability status on their interview packs or anything like that because they were so scared of the rejection and not being able to get into something. A highlight for me with that career was helping someone who'd been out of work for 33 years get back
Wow.
into it. And
Yeah.
she'd been trying for so long. And that
Yeah.
was eating up resources. It was eating up all of these different benefits that are there for people that are out of work because no one would give her the chance. But being able to see kind of how having fair processes in place would stop a lot of that. And it was one of the reasons I wanted to work for ACAS was I was such a big advocate of their services to these people. And being like, have you spoken to ACAS about what happened? Have you seen whether there's anything you can do there? So I was a big believer. I used their services a number of times myself as an employee and manager, and then
Yeah.
promoting them to other people. And yeah, have ended up working there myself, and I'm able to be on the other side of it, helping workplaces to put these practices in place to try and prevent things from going wrong and to build and retain a motivated and engaged workforce.
And so when you became a manager for the first time, did you slip into the role naturally? Did you get a lot of training?
No, not at all. And I will admit, I probably wasn't that great at it. Despite the fact that I was learning some leadership skills at the time in a different avenue, being thrown into that position for the first time without really any kind of training or support in it was really quite unfamiliar to me. And I remember running a kind of 13-hour shift for the first time on my own and messing so many things up that day because I simply wasn't prepared. And the first time that I became quite aware of just how badly I was doing was in a one-to-one with my own line manager, and they casually slid a book across the table to me and just went, this is slightly awkward, but the title of this book was How to Win Friends and Influence People by David Carnegie. And I sat there and I was like, oh gosh, I'm doing quite a bad job if you're giving me this. But it was helpful, and I would recommend the book. But that's when I started to do some training myself on how to get better at management. And yeah, have used that throughout my career, and a large part of it was leadership skills more than anything else.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the training then a little bit more. So you offer two courses, one for new managers, another for developing managers. And
Yeah.
you mentioned before that the new managers course is constantly fully booked. There's a lot of interest in it, which is great. I personally, I'm it's great to hear that, because I worry that there just aren't enough people getting management training in general. I think there was a statistic that came out that something like 82% of managers are accidental managers, had no training. So it's good to know that there is demand for these courses. It doesn't surprise me actually that they're fully booked, because from talking to you, I'm sure they're excellent. What is it like training some new managers? What's it like for them when they go through this process? Do they find it enlightening? Is it? I would imagine it sort of hopefully relieves a lot of anxiety and imposter syndrome and things like that.
Yeah, it's my favourite course of all of ours that we teach, and
Yeah.
we do have a range of different products on different HR knowledge and processes, but the new managers, it's what we call kind of a getting it right session. So we dip into different topics just in kind of bite-sized chunks, fundamentals, to help them develop those skills for the first time. First of all, looking at effective communication, like it's the biggest part of being a manager. But I think the reason it's my favourite course that we do deliver is the change that you see in people by the end of it and the feedback that you get. And that shows when they then come back and do our developing managers course, which is the follow-up, the natural follow-up. And it shows that they've taken those skills, they've embodied them and been like, yeah, this is helpful. And now I want to go further. I want to grow that even more. And it's always great when you get kind of returning customers and coming to do your training again. But the new managers course, first of all, I would say don't exclude yourself from it if you have been a manager for a few years, because we can all still learn these skills years down the line. So if you have been an accidental manager for quite some time and never really had that training, please don't feel like you can't come onto the new managers course and say that you've been a manager for 3 or 4 years. We get a number of people that do that, and then they get to the end and they're like, oh, I wish I'd done this sooner, or this is what I was looking for. I was delivering the new managers course a couple of weeks ago in our Newcastle office, and there was 7 people on it. 6 of them were new to management in the last 6 months. 1 of them had been a manager for 5 years. And at the end of it, she had very similar feedback to the rest of them of like, oh yeah, I'm so glad that I did this. It's really helpful to develop those skills, and it's really helpful to learn more about it.
What are some of the challenges that people bring up in those sessions? Have you heard any sort of horror stories? They're always good to learn from, aren't they?
Yeah, a lot of people just being thrown in completely on the deep end with very little support, and little acknowledgement of how different the process is. You go from being someone who is working as part of the team and is probably doing a very good job at it, which is why you're being promoted, to then suddenly needing a very different skill set, because it's not the same skill set to be good at doing that job or to suddenly be a manager. It takes different levels of communication. It takes different levels of administration. And so a large part of the challenges for people is just not being given the training on those new skills. And yeah, one of the people that was on this course not that long ago, on one of the new managers courses, kind of sat there and she was like, yeah, I'm taking over my current team in the next 2 weeks, and the very first thing that I've got to do is hold their appraisals. And she sat there and she was like, I'm terrified of it. She'd been working in the team for 3 to 4 years. She'd built really good friendships and relationships with them. And the very first thing she was going to be doing as their manager was holding their appraisals. I was like, do they know this? Do they know that they're going to be walking in there to you holding it, not them, not their current manager? She's like, I don't think so. So we kind of had a bit of a discussion around that and an action plan of what they could do differently and how they could support that transition process. But yeah, I mean, it was great for her that she was on the training course a couple of weeks before she became a manager. But even then, she could see, I don't think this transition is going to go very well here if that's the first action that I take as a manager.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? This sort of transition into becoming a manager, especially if you're suddenly managing your old teammates. I think you mentioned before, this idea about maybe there should be a proper onboarding process, and you actually maybe think about it in advance of all the different, you might think about how some of the kind of authorizations and processes might change, but what about the kind of cultural side and the emotional side?
Yeah, definitely. It's such a big part of that transition. If you imagine when someone first starts a new job in a new organization, we would never throw them into it without onboarding them. And that onboarding will be a different length of time depending on what the job will be. But we would never give them that responsibility. We would never put them in front of customers or in front of clients or managing a project on their own without onboarding. But then when someone transitions from being a part of the team to being a line manager, so often that doesn't happen, and they're just kind of said, oh, this is a policy you need to be aware of, this is what you need to look at, these are the actions you need to take, have at it. And there's no skill training, there's no development, there's no mentor or kind of person for them to go to ask questions. And it can be really difficult, particularly if the person who was leading the team before has left, and that's why they've filled that. There's no one for them to go to ask what's this system here? How is this? Why have you done it this way? Did this work well? What are some of the challenges with this team? What are some of the strong points in this team? Now, there are obviously benefits to managing a team that you used to be a part of. You're going to know them really well. You're going to know what some of their strengths are. You're going to know who's better at different tasks and who are the completer finishers and different things like that. But you're going to get to know them in a very different way once you are their line manager, and you're going to see different sides of them. And you also can't let that come through as a bias as well from what you did know before. That can't then influence your management decisions. It can play a part in them, but you need to be really open-minded to getting to know them in a different way, in a new light.
Would you ever advise someone in that position, do they need to do some sort of communication when their first day in the new role to say, look, this is what you can expect from me. This is how I'm going to do this. Yeah,
I think that's a really key way to developing trust, because there's often this fear when there is a new manager. I remember the first time that I was going from having like a line management change where someone was leaving and someone else was coming in. And this person already worked within a different area of the business, and we just kept being told horror stories about it. We kept being told she'll be really by the book, she'll really follow all the policies and processes, and she'll make sure that everything happens right. And it wasn't until a couple of weeks into her being the manager that I turned around and I was like, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that all sounds pretty good, actually.
Why was that told to us as being such a scary thing, that she was going to come and do all of this?
Yeah.
And it saw a really positive change in the team, but it must have been so hard for her to walk into that because of the mindset that had been created beforehand. So absolutely, on that first day or in the first week, have one-to-ones with everyone, spend time getting to know them. Acknowledge that it might be difficult and that you're probably not going to get everything right straight away. I think that goes a really long way in building trust, to say, I know I'm not perfect and I might get things wrong. I want you to feel open to talk to me about that.
Yeah.
If I don't do something the way that works, or if I say something in a way that actually really upsets you, or if I give you feedback in the wrong way, please just be open and honest with me about that, because building trust is such a key part of the effective line manager, and it goes both ways. So you need to trust the team, but the team need to be able to trust you. And you can't just assume that because they've worked with you before that they're going to trust you as a line manager, because it can actually be quite difficult. They might be fearing that you're kind of going to give extra benefits to the people that you're really close friends with, or more favourable treatment to them, and that maybe if you didn't get on that well when you were part of the team before, that it's going to be difficult to have them as your line manager. So the communication that's involved in that first week and in that transition period is really going to play a big part in the rest of that journey with the team. And it's so important to get right at the offset.
That's right. Some of our clients actually on Appraised have started doing new manager check-ins with the manager's manager to, sort of take them through a series of prompts that are designed to get them to kind of think about all of these things in advance, get their kind of week one plan ready, think about the different kind of moving parts and how to make sure it all goes well. And then we've also got some who are also doing these, they're sort of like how I like to be managed check-ins, which I also really like. So some of our clients are doing this, and they're asking people, how do you like to receive feedback? Some people, for example, don't particularly like to receive kind of company-wide recognition or praise or something like that. They worry it's gonna, I don't know, they get embarrassed about it, whereas others love it. And so we've started doing those as well, which has been quite interesting with some of our customers. So there are a few kind of tools you can put in place to help these conversations happen. I think everyone needs a little helping hand, a bit of guidance, like the kind of guidance that you give in
Mm.
your training and on your website as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And that's the great part of having systems such as Appraised, because it really helps to have kind of a template in place or a system to be like, have you thought about this? Because
Yeah.
it's also really busy, the transition from being a
Yeah.
team member to a manager. Your workload increases, you're suddenly expected to do more, and being able to manage that as well as upskilling yourself can be difficult. So having a system in place that is structured and will prompt those conversations and prompts those check-ins is really
Yeah.
helpful. Definitely.
Yeah. Talking about thinking about taking over or becoming a manager of a team, I wondered if you might like to just tell us a bit more about your thoughts about, or how you advise people on your training sessions about how to consider the different members of your team, because everyone's so different. You know, how do you navigate that as a new manager? And what sort of things do you need to be looking out for?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to do it, and it does come down to the individual and their own management style. First of all, I would say take some management style quizzes. There's loads of ones out there. It's
Okay.
going to help you determine how you manage people best. So what your strengths and weaknesses are.
Okay. So
But
you
then
can sort of
also
go with
learning the
the
team.
grain. Is
Yeah,
that the idea? Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I think there's quite a culture within this country, and it starts from school all the way up, of creating people that are jack of all trades instead of
Mm.
specialists. And actually creating people that are specialists is so helpful.
Yep.
Like, if someone is good at public speaking, let them grow that skill and go into it. Don't make them become really good at standing face to face with one individual. Like, let them develop that skill that they're good at. So, yeah, learn how you use your strengths well as a manager. Like, what are your best areas? Are
Mm.
you the best person to be training new staff, or actually are you really bad at training and you should be outsourcing that to someone else in your team or HR or even from external in the business? Like, it it takes a really strong degree of self-awareness to be a good
Yeah.
manager, to be able to look at what are my skills, what am I good at, and what am I not. On the new managers program, when we deliver that, one of the first things that we get them to do is list the responsibilities of a line manager. So what are their duties? And then list the skills that are needed to do that. And I always ask them, I was like, I want you to spend 2 minutes checking this list and giving it a tick or a cross as to whether you have that skill or not. I'm not going to ask you to show it to anyone else. This is just for your own resources. Do
Mm.
you currently possess this skill? Can you give effective feedback? Can you actively listen to people? Can you show empathy? Can you deal with the things that need to be dealt with when they happen and have informal conversations, or sometimes the formal conversations? And then that's your list, that's your development goals off the back of that. Be
Mm.
very honest with yourself about where the missing points are, where the skills gaps are, and then take the time to develop those skills as soon as you can, because they will be needed and they will be necessary. But yeah,
Yeah.
also just, I use the word diagnosing your team, which may be the wrong word to use, but really just knowing who they are and getting to know them. Because I kind of say to the people on the course, imagine if you had a team of Francescas. It wouldn't function very well. They would be very innovative, very creative. They would develop new products all of the time and new resources, but they would really struggle with kind of emails back and forth. They would struggle with anything administrative. They would take things very literally and there would be no nuance.
Mm.
And it wouldn't be an effective team, because you don't want a clone army. Like, you don't want everyone to be the same. But then as a line manager, don't fall into the trap of treating your team as though they are all Francescas. Like, you're going to have some Rollies, you're going to have like all of these different people in your team, and they will need different things from you. So I'm an external processor. I have slightly more regular one-to-ones with my manager than a lot of the rest of my team do, because I really value from having that conversation track that's open for us to be able to discuss things. Like, I was sending an email to a client today and I had to like talk it through with someone else to be like, is this too harsh? Is this too firm? Is this the right way? And for me, with a line manager, having that open communication track to be able to externally process is so valuable. Whereas another individual might not want that frequency of communication. They might be much happier with a more hands-off approach, kind of more flexibility to do things in a different way. And so, yeah, it really does take asking the question of perhaps, how do you like to be managed? Although,
Yeah.
put some boundaries in place with their answer. If they're going to say, oh, I'm fine, you don't need to check in with me at all, ever, delegate everything to me, it's all good. Like, there's got to be some expectations set there, and until you can see how they work, you're probably going to be touching base a little bit more often. But yeah, trust should be easily given, but it can also be easily lost, and set that expectation with your team that, you know, if there is a sticking point, you will be stepping in. You're not just going to leave things hanging, because that does help you to earn trust. If there is a problem in your team and the rest of the team see you not dealing with it, they're not going to trust you to deal with their problems or with future incidents or anything like that. So
Yeah.
it will cause a resentment quite quickly. And
Yeah.
informal conversations can be tricky to have, but you can develop the skills quite easily. It's something that we really focus on in a lot of our different products, not just the management skills. We look at it in our discipline and grievance training. We look at it in our absence management training. Having structured informal conversations at an early point, before something escalates, before it gets to the point that some a more formal process has got to be put in, shows so many benefits to everyone involved. It helps people to get back on track faster. It helps with employee retention. It's typically about a third of the cost of following a formal process. So there is that kind of employer benefit there of the cost implication. But it is widely shown from a lot of studies that it is the best resolution for actually making the change. It really motivates people to be, yeah, okay, I want to do this. I'm gonna make a change here.
I think it's a really interesting one, because I'd love to know what you think about this, because I was in a room the other day where someone was saying, you know, sometimes when you've got, especially someone new in your team, you don't know them that well, you're sort of getting to know them, and or maybe you've hired them, you know, and you think, this is exciting, got a new person, really want to get them up to speed. I want to give them a great experience as well, so that they, you know, arrive on a high and, you know, they feel really empowered and productive. And, you know, they're more likely to stick around. But perhaps during that probation period, there's something niggling you as a manager, and you sort of think, is it just me? Or is this a thing? And could be a bit awkward to talk about this right now, because I'm also trying to say how excited we are about having you. And I, you know, you sometimes hear managers sort of doubting themselves. You know, are my expectations too high? Do I have the authority to make this judgment? You know, maybe I've actually hired an expert and I'm a manager. They actually know they're an individual contributor. They know their thing really well. You know, that I find this does sometimes come up with the managers that I meet. Do you ever come across that in your sessions or the work that you do?
Yeah, definitely. And we can sometimes set expectations that are too high, and it is important to acknowledge that when someone's starting off. We don't all learn to walk at the same age, do we? Like, some people, I was walking at 10 months. My sister didn't start walking until 15 months. Like, that's a 5-month difference, but we're both really good at walking now in our late 20s. So it is the same when someone new joins, or a new starter, or when there's a new skill to develop. Like, acknowledge that people will learn in different ways and at different strengths and things. But yeah, there's a couple of different things when it comes to an informal conversation. First of all, if you have that niggle, listen to it. Like, the niggle is not saying that they are doing anything wrong. It's just opening up a conversation. And if you are having regular one-to-ones with your staff, then it should be easy to involve that as part of the conversation. But don't prioritize improvement rather than prioritizing punishment. So whenever you are having a conversation, whenever you are looking at a niggle or anything like that, it should never be focused on what they're doing wrong. It should never be focused on why they're doing it wrong. It should always be focused on how to make it better and what the benefits of making it better will be. And that's a really key way to change someone's motivation from them feeling like they've been chastised and told off to feeling motivated to improve. And do that however works best for you. So some people like the compliment sandwich, some people don't. Some people like very direct, just tell me what I need to improve and then let me get on with it. Some people want to be given very structured, this is exactly how you need to improve it. And then some people like, tell me what's wrong and I'll work out how to fix it. So that, again, it comes down to knowing your staff. But the best technique that you can use, and certainly in my opinion, is coaching. And coaching, I'm not talking like a football coach on the pitch who's shouting instructions at the players running around. Coaching is a technique of using open questions to help them come to a solution themselves. So if you were coaching me on podcast techniques, for example, you would be like, oh, okay, how do you think it went today, Francesca? What do you think you did really well? What do you think we could do to help you improve it for next time? And that's not saying that something has gone wrong, but we can always get better. And I think we sometimes look at the word skill and think that we can hit 100% of it, and we can't. It's an infinite process. We can always get better at most things that we do. And yes, we will hit our own ceilings, but with more investment, we can typically get past them and move forward further. So yeah, I guess to encourage people to have that informal conversation, there is a lot of evidence that shows that the cost of not having it is higher than having it. And also, I think with a lot of managers, when it comes to something like bullying, for example, or when it comes to issues of kind of unacceptable behaviours, they're so scared that if they have that conversation, either it will get worse or that they'll just leave. And it's not necessarily a valid fear. It could get worse or they could leave, but that's not always the worst thing. Like if you have got someone in your team where their behaviours are upsetting other staff, where their behaviours are causing problems, and ultimately they leave off the back of the conversation, you're probably going to end up with a team that works more cohesively, a team that gets on better, a team that is less stressed and has less absence. So yeah, I think whenever you are coming to have an informal conversation, first of all, identify what your fears are around it and why. So what's stopping you from having it? What's holding you back? Is it a fear that you don't have the authority? Well, you do, because you're now the line manager, so you have the authority to say it. Is it a fear that they won't take it well? Okay, then perhaps role play it with someone else first. Get advice from your HR department. We actually get quite a few managers calling our helpline before they're going to have a conversation to play it through with us. Our helpline advisors quite enjoy it when they're able to say like, yeah, okay, that was a great way to structure the conversation, or have you thought about saying this? So that can be a good way to do it. But again, if they've got a mentor in place as well, then that's a really helpful place for them to go to. There's so many different ways that they can empower themselves to have the conversation.
I think that's fantastic, and I didn't know about the helpline until you told us earlier, and I think a lot of people could find that really helpful. And I know we could go on. We could talk about different leadership styles. You mentioned capability versus conduct. We haven't talked about DEI. We could go on and on, but I don't think we've got any more time, unfortunately. I think the best thing is if we will publish your details, and I'm sure people will follow you and contact you, and or ACAS as well. So if people do want to know more, what's the best, how can they find ACAS?
Yeah, absolutely. So ACAS is literally ACAS. Please just have a look at the website. It's still somehow managed to hold on to the .org.uk, which there's not many of anymore. So yeah, acas.org.uk. And there are so many different things on our website to help people. We have a lot of templates for having conversations. There's e-learning. So if someone does want kind of free access to something they can do in their own time, bite size, the e-learning resources are all there. But then we do have our training courses as well. And the helpline, like I used that helpline so many times before I joined ACAS. It is a free to access service. It's Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. The number will be below on the screen, I'm
Put it
sure.
on the
So
notes.
yeah, and that is there for anyone. It's there for an employee who's going through a problem who needs advice. It's there for an employer who needs advice. It's there for the managers. It's there for HR. Like it is there for everyone, and it's a free resource. So do take advantage of it. But yeah,
Brilliant.
feel free to follow me on LinkedIn or anything like that as well. I tend to post a lot of ACAS resources on there and information about line management skills or things like that.
And there's a conference coming up.
There is, yeah. So in May, we are holding an ACAS conference. It's in London at the QE2. And yeah, a wealth of different sessions throughout it, but one that should really help people that have kind of been on today as well. I'm just making sure that I get the title of it correct. I believe it will be underneath as well. But it's about whether kind of giving line management skills training is the panacea to all workplace problems. And I'll admit I had to research what that word was, but panacea is kind of a fix for everything. So yeah, that should be a great session for people to look out for if they're interested in coming along.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for joining today and sharing your experience with us.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Good. And to all of our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And don't forget to follow the Appraised podcast on all the usual channels, the Appraised website, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the others. And we'll see you again in our next episode.